Remove it. Completely. No legacy clauses. No residual access nodes, no name left in the index. The command struck the chamber, like a descending gavel. Sovereign Drell Varnick didn't raise his voice. He never had to. His presence cut through diplomacy, the way ice displaces breath. Around him the upper tiers of the Concord assembly shifted, scaled hands adjusted armor clasps, optical veins dimmed, translators updated with the final directive, remove Earth. Outside the main tribunal vault, light-stripped corridors trembled as the summit platform extended its quorum interface across gravitational tiers. The motion had reached final review. A technician from the Tessic delegation nodded toward the council ledger, his third eye twitching in anticipation. Motion 2293A confirmed. Earth's charter status terminated upon quorum seal. Seal it, Varnick ordered. No appeal, no retrograde index. That world is not ours. It is nothing. A deep pulse echoed through the Concord amphitheater as the Treaty 0.1 seal flared orange on the central pillar, a fluid, volatile sphere of compressed logic fields. Dozens of sub-council tablets synced, lines of Terran origin treaty code collapsing into non-function. For most in the chamber, Earth was already forgotten, a fading relic that had refused integration, then silence, then decay. Your record will show unanimous majority, Varnick stated, eyes flicking toward the laser plasma display flickering above. 3-block accord, no Terran observer, motion fulfilled. Then the chamber door unlocked. It didn't open. It disengaged. Every panel retracted like clockwork, exposing a narrow corridor, and at its end walked in a man without insignia. He moved without ceremony, one step after the next, arms loose at his side, no device in hand, no delegate tag on his breast. His gait carried the weight of someone not foreign, but remembered too late. The Concord's audio-visual systems, bound to the summit's legal recognition protocols, activated him mid-stride. His presence authenticated him. No one had input his arrival. Who is this? Varnick asked, already knowing the answer. Saren Volrick paused before the Terran seat, still empty, still registered as unconfirmed entity. The man's eyes were colorless under the fluorescing summit dome, not glassy, not dead, just absent of distraction. Delegate Volrick, came a voice from the treaty interface, tone cold as filtered data, recognition sequence aligned. Quorum now complete. The hall did not fall silent. It locked into attention. Varnick rose from his tri-pronged dais. You arrive without announcement, without chain of custody, and you expect to challenge this record. Volrick didn't glance up. No, he took the Terran seat. The summit pillar dimmed. The Treaty 0.1 seal began flickering, once then again, struggling to finalize. A status loop unfolded across all laser plasma displays overhead. Quorum incomplete. Updated. Quorum fulfilled. Awaiting final statement from entity. Earth. Volrick leaned forward. His voice arrived not from his throat, but through every diplomatic interface in the chamber, as if the system itself recited it. Earth acknowledges nullification. Witnessed. No more. The displays froze, not stuttered, not glitched, froze, like a calculation that could not conclude because the numbers had changed behind it. A Cartesian envoy spoke for the first time in 100 years. He's not armed. He's not even transmitting. Why is the system syncing with his seat? The summit technician at rear control traced his fingers across the panel, every input returning the same status. Authority verified, via root protocol, override not available. Varnick stepped down. His footfall on the concentric steps echoed as if the room had expanded. This quorum was sealed. This delegate was not present during pre-vote. This cannot stand. Yet it does, Volrick replied. Calm, not defiant, confirming. A single red line extended from the pillar to the delegate ring, like a vein drawn across artificial skin. It connected Earth's seat to the central core, not through power, not through data, but through validity. A symbolic confirmation, one that couldn't be revoked once acknowledged. Is this an Earth sabotage? Someone whispered. No one answered. Varnick turned to the technician. Purge the interface. The technician shook his head slowly. Purge command is disabled. The system, it believes he completed the quorum, by code, not by presence. On the central display, the words rotated. Treaty 0.1, Fulfillment verified. Protocol reference, Sable, condition met. Ren Voltor, a systems analyst seated far from the center, exhaled hard through flared nasal vents. Sable is dead law. Abandon code. It was nullified before Earth's final withdrawal. Then how? Varnick hissed. Is it returning status complete? Another symbol appeared, low along the outer rim of the summit seal, a Terran construct, rare, even among old charter designers. 3 concentric rings collapsed inward, forming a square at their center. A null glyph, ancient Terran for structure concluded. Volrek stood. The laser plasma display above him transitioned from procedural data to blank field, not dark, blank, as if it had never existed. Then it began to project a waveform, audio first, then metadata, not from Volrek, from the chair itself. A transmission pulse embedded in the quorum code had activated, silent for a century. Not a virus, not an override, a confirmation. In the lower tiers of the chamber, a Vorn tactician grunted. He didn't trigger anything. The system triggered itself. He was just the missing input. Volrek said nothing more. He stepped from his seat, the interface flickering back to dormant as he passed. No AI greeted him. No guards stopped him. His path had already been approved by the system itself. Where is he going? Someone asked. To leave, Voltor muttered. For what? There was no answer. Volrek reached the corridor. The door didn't close. It faded, edges losing form, until the entrance had never existed. The hall remained unchanged. Only the memory of its opening remained. Varnick turned back toward the display, the flickering treaty seal still rendering its double-validated state. Fulfilled, non-reversible. For the first time in his political life, Drell Varnick didn't know which law had defeated him. And in the void where the quorum seal hung, a new message unspooled in Terran standard. Witness logged, origin withdrawn. Starboard lanes are freezing again. That's the 5th route this cycle. The voice crackled through command deck audio, tight, clipped, but threading panic beneath procedure. Captain Jorv Alenth of the Tessic Merchant Corps stood at the edge of a navigation console, surrounded by blinking yellow identifiers. Beyond the viewport, trade lanes flickered like unraveling stitches across the stars. One by one, jump points returned null responses, refusing route confirmation. He pressed his gloved palm to the console. Nav AI, reinitialize route logic. Manual input override. Verify Solarius path. A response blinked across the heads-up display. Origin signature, not valid. Route disqualified. The crew said nothing. They'd seen unexpected error messages before, usually after cross-sector drift storms or triarch calibration resets. But this one was different, systemic, rooted, and absolute. Alenth exhaled through his nose. Strip Earth reference tags, substitute Paxari derivations. The AI pulsed once. Fallback protocol denied. Anchor timestamp unresolved. Behind him, one of the younger tacticians murmured, "Sir, relay nodes across the median drift arc just went dark, like archive offline dark, not silence, erased." Alenth didn't answer. He simply turned toward the observation rail, his boots clipping hard against the magnetized decking. Out there, merchant ships sat stalled like insects caught in resin, unable to move, speak, or trade. Their lights dimmed, not from failure, but indecision, systems waiting for validation that would never return. At the heart of Concord Command, Sovereign Drell Varnick leaned into the data hollow before him, eyes absorbing lines of unreadable treaty feedback streaming across the heads-up panel. The treaty seal still displayed the fulfillment of Protocol Sable, and now command modules across 5 quadrants were reporting cascading nav disqualifications. "Summon Valtor," he growled. Moments later, Ren Valtor entered, sweat clinging behind his optical bridge. The analyst hadn't slept since Volrek left the chamber. He moved like a man climbing out of quicksand, brisk but without footing. "The merchant fleets have stalled," Varnick began. "I want the cause now." Valtor stepped up beside the display. "The problem isn't directional, it's definitional. These systems weren't broken, they were instructed to stop." Varnick's fingers clenched. "Explain." Valtor gestured toward a cascading diagnostic scroll. "Every trans-sector route, every financial timestamp, even our AI interface logs, Nearly all of it ties back to Terran origin ledger anchors, specifically, legacy blockchains from Earth's Treaty 0.1 infrastructure. Those anchors are now void. I signed that nullification myself. You did, Valtor confirmed, and the act satisfied a clause in the original stack. The system didn't view it as deletion, it saw it as fulfillment, a completed condition, which means all references dependent on that node have reached end-of-life status. Varnic's jaw stiffened. Are you telling me the deletion of Earth caused these systems to self-terminate, not terminate? De-recognize. The architecture was built to be stable only if all origin points remained accessible. By invoking nullification, you cut the root chain from every structure built atop it. We're not dealing with sabotage. This is collapse through satisfaction. In the outer sectors, alarms began to register not as threats, but as absences. One inter-colony trade ring showed no defined participants. A Cartesian transport route returned data, stating its own existence couldn't be verified. On the Laravan outer loop, a merchant vessel drifted through lightless fog, navigation logs, unable to update, trade cargo, unable to validate ownership. Its AI voice repeated softly, awaiting reference. Inside a monitoring post aboard Coalition Relay Axis T-12, Mivak Jern reviewed AI logs with quiet revulsion. The core system had not been breached. It had unspooled itself, every node displaying the same terminal phrase, entity untraceable, structure satisfied. The command was ancient, buried, but alive. Who in the tribunal knew this clause existed? Jern asked his adjutant. No one, sir. Earth embedded structural fulfillment logic across every agreement they authored. It was never an override, just a condition. The moment they were fully nullified, the clause treated that as contract fulfillment. Final. Where did they even store the activation triggers? Inside the verification loops, legal recursion. We never noticed because the system read them as dormant, not active, not hostile, just waiting. Jern's throat dried. They didn't code a virus, they planted a decision. Out beyond the trade networks, the null beacons began rebroadcasting, not calls for connection, but statements of invalidation. These weren't warnings, they were announcements. Terran design signal pillars reversed sync, pushing timestamp pings backward, throwing AI loops into temporal contradiction. In the Council's lower decks, an aide from the Vorn hierarchy stumbled into a chamber holding an archive of sovereign validation nodes. Everyone blinked red. He reached for a terminal, touched a command square, and watched as the center display slowly faded into static. Then it rebooted, not with standard boot code, but with a white symbol, a square inside a ring, inside another. The Terran null glyph. He backed away. In the adjacent strategy bay, Drell Varnick stared across a map of the galactic core. One by one, sectors turned gray, not offline, but undefined, like ink smeared beneath a pane. The galaxy itself wasn't shrinking, it was forgetting. Where is Earth now? Varnick asked. Valtor shook his head. No sensor can fix a lock. Their registry's gone. Their treaties, fulfilled. Every beacon or access node they touched has either reversed, withdrawn, or nullified. We can't even triangulate their solar origin. Sol reads as a relic. Varnick's grip stiffened. Can we reset? Valtor's eyes lowered to the floor. Every fallback system references Earth at least once. We can't isolate them. They're embedded. In the calibration, in the timestamps, even in the conflict resolution AI ethics chains. Earth didn't attack us, Sovereign. Varnick's silence stretched. They just left, Valtor whispered. And when they left, they took the Foundation with them. The chamber's lights dimmed not from malfunction, but because no longer was there a central verification of standard lumen sync. A subtle shift passed through the air, like tension no longer opposed, just uncertain. The Concorde didn't feel breached, it felt unmoored. Back aboard the drifting merchant fleet, a lone pilot blinked at his frozen screen. No star charts loaded, no voice. Then a final notification appeared. Its origin unverified, navigation terminated, entity Earth, fulfilled, and then nothing. Track him, or I'll have your post stripped to ash. The command broke through the static-laced ops channel of the Vorn Hirate's central relay fortress. Admiral Kareth Molan stood beneath a dome of arched signal conduits, eyes locked on the flickering trace grid, Volric's exit trail, or what should have been. The trace team scurried along tiered control surfaces, tapping strings of commands into ice blue panels, but every pulse they sent into deep-range arrays returned malformed. Lieutenant Wren's voice cracked behind a wall of static. Trace packets hit 12 nodes. All returned inverse resolution. Negative location match. Molin's jaw tensed. That ship didn't evaporate. It left marks. The marks reflect back in perfect symmetry, Wren replied, glancing at his terminal. Not echoes, mirrors. In the data vault beneath them, the Herate's intelligence spires processed quantum positioning input across half a dozen sectors. What they found wasn't a void. It was a reflection. Each tracking signal hit a path that wasn't merely lost. It looped back inverted at a signal ratio so tight it mimicked its sender. Molin turned to his comms chief. Deploy Cybertrace cluster. Full burn. I want recursive decoders on every Terran registry ever signed. Use war-class logic trees. The cluster launched. 89 AI probes encoded with adaptive trace protocols flooded out into the galactic grid. Their task: locate Saren Volric, his vessel, or Earth's last living tether. Within minutes, the first failure registered. Loop lock detected in core audit sequence, a technician said, blinking hard at the heads-up panel above. Request protocol stuck in recursive handshake. The clause it's referencing, origin anchor zeros, is returning undefined input. Override. Molin snapped. Override rejected. Parent clause not found. Back in Concord Tower, Mavac Jern studied the fallout. Around him, systems that once hummed with bureaucratic clarity now hesitated, hiccuped, then spit out contradiction. Status reports from Coalition vessels and data frames ran like corrupted hymns. Why are all Terran-rooted systems suddenly refusing audit? Jern asked the protocol liaison. They're not refusing, they're self-terminating in compliance with completion logic. You're saying they believe the treaties are done? No, worse. They believe there's nothing left to validate. Laser plasma displays throughout the chamber flashed hazard orange overlays. Transactional feeds blanked, returning with phrase clusters that meant nothing, yet conveyed finality. Original clause not found. Anchor dependency erased. Validation loop exceeded. On the deck below, a junior systems officer from the Coalition fleet stuttered through a live field report. We sent breach drones into Terran comm relics, units orbiting dead sectors for 70 cycles. The moment they interfaced, those relics activated dormant subsystems. Jern stiffened. Dormant mirrors. Sir, the probes were intercepted, not hacked, but reflected. The breach drones transmitted command keys, and the relics sent identical returns, reversed in logic. Protocol mirror traps, Jern whispered, voice buried under disbelief. They didn't stop us, they let us attack ourselves. Outside the transmission dome, breach drone telemetry lit up in spiraling chaos. Fleets received orders from their own command chains, only reversed, distorted just enough to trigger fleet AI self-containment measures. In one quadrant, a Tessic carrier group froze mid-transit, propulsion systems locked by internal contradiction flags. At Coalition command, Drell Varnick stormed into the strategic gallery as reports spread like chemical fire. How many nodes are returning mirror signals? 32, possibly more. Every Terran-linked relic seems equipped with this behavior. Varnick turned to the tactical display. The map no longer showed military lines or Stargate chains. Instead, it pulsed inward, layers folding toward a center no one could reach. The movement resembled retreat, but the direction was self-directed collapse. Why are we collapsing inward? He barked. Because outward doesn't exist anymore, Ren Valto replied from the periphery. His expression held no panic, only growing comprehension. The architecture we relied on was built atop interdependent identity loops. You remove the root identity, Earth and the directional logic loses meaning. Now the systems only loop back to themselves. A murmur passed through the upper command ring. Jern folded his arms. The fallback logic should have allowed severance, not if fallback was coded to validate the original root first. Earth didn't build failovers, they built collapsible recursion. Another AI loop reached shutdown, then another, then 7 more. Each displayed a unique collapse signature, none repeating, each triggered by engagement rather than failure. It wasn't sabotage, it was absorption. Systems absorbing the input they were designed to reject only when origin validation was voided. Molin's fleet control panels began issuing behavioral suspensions across entire brigades. Orders weren't just countered, they were reflected. An admiral's command to isolate power relays caused a full lockdown of opposite sectors. "They're using symmetry," Mavak Jern said quietly. "They didn't build weapons, they built conceptual reversals." Down in the Concorde's judicial data silo, forensic analysts combed through treaty archives, looking for backdoors or signal beacons embedded in Terran frameworks. All they found were closures, legal conditions met, activated, and left without a mechanism for reversal. The search ended where it began, with Saren Volrich's seat, a chair now inactive, but still there. An aide noticed the seat's data socket pulsing once every 30 seconds, a low-frequency transfer, minimal, elegant, the kind used in old diplomacy handshakes. He tried to interface with it. The system rejected him instantly. Request denied, not origin, not witnessed. Above, on the central summit sphere, the Concorde's heads-up overlay started folding the tactical dashboard inward. Symbols meant for expansion, fleet movement, treaty coverage, supply routing, now animated in reverse, not shrinking, reversing, not a breach, a withdrawal. The Council's projected map began to bleed, its edges disappearing, its nodes blinking out, replaced by symmetrical rings folding back on themselves like ancient glyphs returning to clay. In that silence, Varnick stared at the center of the map. "Where is the center now?" he asked. No one. There was no answer, because the center had never been a location. "Pull the thread again, this time from the rear of the divergence vector." Varun Telrex's words were hushed, but in the Council's intelligence core, no one moved until he spoke. Every station pulsed under stress. Cum lattice indicators rotated in uneven loops. At the central table, 4 layers of active quantum trace logs spiraled in attempt to locate Valrek's exit trail. Each loop began clearly. Each vanished midstream. "Third trace collapse," muttered the junior analyst, hands hovering over a static slick projection interface. "Path initiates at Summit Gate Theta. Terminates halfway into Drift Arc B. No deceleration. No exit beacon. Just decay." Telrex didn't blink. "Define decay." Sensor resolution returns null, as though the object resolved itself out of navigable vector space. He stepped forward, fingers grazing the edge of a command grid. Cold, dry. The panel remained live, but the data it projected was fragmentary, each retrieval a cracked mirror of its previous call. On the heads-up plasma display above them, Valrek's vessel read as eventless divergence, active undefined. It wasn't cloaked, it wasn't gone. It had simply refused traceability. Counselor Pranov, viewing from a tertiary tier, leaned into his comm node. "Try a sublayer ping. Deep veil frequency, below diplomatic ledger band." The technician nodded and initiated. On screen, the signal bounced forward, hit a point of false resolution, and rebounded inverted, not delayed. Reversed. Pranov stiffened. Did the signal just reflect before impact? Exactly before, the tech confirmed. A signature matched it ahead of its own position, and sent back a mirrored response. "It knew we were coming." Telrex turned. "What tech does that?" The response came from the shadows behind the array stacks, an older voice, uninvited but recognized instantly. "Havk Strawn. Graviosonic veils," he said. "It's not stealth, it's projectionless divergence." Strawn stepped into the dim light, coat trailing across the inlaid network flooring. He carried no device, no title, but no one questioned his presence, not now. "Graviosonic theory was scrapped a century ago," Pranov said, voice thin. "No," Strawn corrected. "It was classified when Earth realized what it wasn't, not a cloak, but a spatial negotiation. A ship running under it leaves no wake, no trajectory. You don't hide it, it simply never reflects. You're not tracing an object, you're watching a condition dissolve." On the upper deck, Drell Varnick entered, shoulders tight. "Tell me you've located Sol." "Define located," Strawn said softly. The room turned still. "The system's beacon registers," a relay operator explained, "but every frequency above Class B bounces, headings cross-check, gravity wells calculate, yet nothing appears, not even darkness." Varnick stepped into range of the heads-up panel, where an attempt to render the Sol system blinked, then folded. No failure notice, just blank input, no radiation, none, no electromagnetic bleed. It reads like a signal vacuum, a place where information cannot commit. Valtor emerged from the lower corridor, with a data spool cradled under one arm. Every scan directed at Sol now redirects to its sender. Not an error, a substitution. They've created observational symmetry. Jern joined from the opposite entry. We've tried distortion mapping, scatter arrays, deep bounce triangulation. Nothing holds. Earth didn't vanish. They designed a condition where you can't reach a conclusion. Override it, Varnick barked. Bypass Council protocol. Force scan via emergency clause. The relay officer hesitated. That requires quorum confirmation. Protocol override won't initialize without full delegation loop. We are the quorum. No, said a voice from the left wall. An archivist. You were. Earth's seat, though empty now, completed the last valid quorum. The system believes it's closed. No new motion is possible without the initiating framework. That framework is gone, Varnick snapped. And so is your authority, Strawn added, dryly. At that, Varnick's hand curled against the edge of the operations bay. His nails scraped against the smooth alloy. In orbit over Turn Grid 9, beacon towers began to shift transmission status. What once fed forward command instructions to frontier outposts now fed back into themselves, not as error, as fulfillment. Counselor, said the beacon chief from a remote relay. The beacons are rewriting their own origin points. Charter headers now show unassigned source. Logic retired. They aren't referencing Earth, they're referencing completion. Heads turned, words failed. The heads-up display flickered. On its surface, quadrant maps folded in on themselves like burned paper curling into negative space. Beacons once pointed from Earth, now they pointed nowhere. Strawn watched the transformation quietly. This isn't concealment, he murmured. This is subtraction. They didn't hide Sol, they erased the terms under which Sol could be seen. In the war room, a new suggestion came forward. Redirect beacon authentication to primary route, the earliest charter alignment, before Terran formatting. Valtor checked the archival spool. That format doesn't exist anymore. It was standardized through Earth. Fallback. Fallback was coded to validate origin first. If origin is closed, fallback resolves as undefined. Jern stared at the projection, a dark grid showing mirrored signal pulses, returning with no anchor. We're not tracking absence, we're trapped in it. In a final act of desperation, Pranov activated the treaty interface node, an ancient hardware relic wired into the Council's legal foundation. Its display came online, requesting quorum authentication. He keyed his own code, then Varnick's, then Jern's. The system blinked. Quorum, incomplete. Last legal quorum fulfilled. Further votes disallowed. Silence held. No alarms, no warnings, only the steady confirmation that the system no longer required their participation. A relay tech in the far corner leaned forward. Sir, something's happening on the old Earth Embassy node. Heads turned. On the wall display, a forgotten relay station, buried deep in diplomatic wastelands, came online for the first time in decades. It played no broadcast. It lit no beacon. It displayed only a rotating phrase, structure witnessed, source withdrawn, and nothing more. Execute the override. Full domain sweep. Drell Varnick's command rang through the summit relay deck, his palm flattened against the quorum interface. Above him, the primary laser plasma display displayed rows of treaty chains, flickering, severing, rewriting themselves midstream. What began as procedural malfunction now unfolded as systemic fragmentation. Counselor Pranov leaned toward the command spine, fingers twitching above the signal conductor. Override rejected. Route recognition index cannot validate source. I am the sovereign head of a full quadrant. Varnick barked, neck taut. This table acknowledges my authority. A secondary heads-up array rendered the response before anyone could echo it aloud. Sovereignty cannot be asserted from a collapsed anchor. Down in the archive core, Halfek Strawn pressed a finger to an ancient cylinder, the casing wrapped in coil print from a prior century. He hadn't spoken in minutes, not since Sol vanished from every registry. His breath carried the bitterness of memory unshared too long. Ren Valter read over his shoulder. This is your memo. 84 cycles ago, Strawn replied. Filed, ignored. Valter brushed dust from the scroll's edge. They assumed it was theoretical. It was. until you made it historical. The memo detailed quantum anchor decay systems, a predictive safeguard Earth embedded into all Terran-led treaty structures. Unlike traceable software, these weren't directives, they were commitments. If the origin point ceased verification, then all derivative structures, not just systems, but interpretations, would enter scheduled disintegration. Above them, broadcast networks cracked. Tribunal channels once color-coded for diplomatic tier bled into white static. On the main display, council votes began voiding themselves, not by attack, but by revocation. Logs erased while signatures were mid-confirmation. Mevek Jern snapped open his COM thread. Order all guild networks to soft reset their ledger mirrors. If we rebuild from regional roots, they won't rebuild. Veltor interrupted. Earth authored the root timestamp protocol. Every ledger began there. The moment we severed that chain, we undid the future's continuity. Jern stared at the screen. One chart showed the Trade Commission's projection graph collapsing line by line, credits becoming undefined, then unreadable. Values weren't falling, they were being unassigned. Across the chamber, Pranav raised his voice above the growing static. The archive nodes have begun self-restructuring. No one's touched them. They're defaulting to condition-fulfilled states. Treaties can't default, Varnick snapped. They can if fulfillment is embedded as termination, said Strawn. On the exterior feed, command flags across Triarch-packed space began to flicker. Not downed, not torn, shifting. One moment their crests shimmered with Alliance-coded design, the next they displayed flat gray panels. No identifier, no nation, only data void. In the economic bay, Trade Board regulators scrambled to reroute market exchanges through secure quantum nodes. Each attempt failed. The board itself, once a glowing lattice of buyer-seller verification chains, flickered blank. One of the techs whispered, "This isn't a breakdown, the network agrees it's finished." On the legal broadcast channel, a half-completed tribunal vote glitched mid-session. The vote to suspend Earth's systemic access retroactively stuttered halfway through resolution. The screen captured a moment where a dozen counselors had cast votes. Seconds later, their names vanished. The motion logged as never initiated. Jern blinked at the display. The logs are erasing actions that still happened. They're not being deleted, said Valtor. They're being corrected. The system is retroactively aligning to a version of history where Earth was never excluded, because it was never required. Varnick spun toward him. Then how do we stop it? You don't stop quantum decay, said Strawn. You outlast it. But that assumes you weren't built atop the decaying structure. A relay beacon flashed red on the northern panel. Transmission from Outpost Caval 12, someone called out. Trade Ret Grid rejected system authentication. Attempted to reissue new network ID. All COM lattice links voided on return. What was the last message sent? The technician hesitated, then read it aloud. Origin not acknowledged. Query unrecognized. In the corridor beneath the primary council chamber, the floor lighting began cycling backward, white to black in reverse pattern, as though even the illumination refused to remember its sequence. Flags still visible on walls began glitching. Not a ripple, not a tear. They unraveled from concept, digital patterns no longer sure of what they represented. Send a command to reset charter memory cores, Jern ordered. Patch into static backups. I don't care if they're a century old. A technician responded without looking up. Already tried. Backup nodes reference treaty seal anchors. All point to Sable trigger as baseline. If Sable is fulfilled, all subsequent framework is conditionally expired. Strawn stepped into the center of the chamber, the only man not rushing, not shouting. His voice cut through like old paper sliced clean. You wanted dominance through deletion. What you achieved was systemic absolution. Earth didn't burn you down, they walked away, and you couldn't define yourselves without their reflection. Varnick clenched a fist. There must be an end. Strawn turned to face him. You're standing in it. Over the council apex, the laser plasma display darkened. In its place, a black void spun, simple, motionless. Then words emerged in Terran Standard. Not flashing, not animated, just present. Final witness logged. Agreement fulfilled. Anchor withdrawn. Then the signal ceased. No fade-out, no corruption, just a blank display, perfectly quiet. The treaty rooms fell into a silence that wasn't absence. It was remainder. All that remained was the echo of a structure that no longer accepted its participants, and the knowledge that they were no longer in collapse, they were in conclusion. Who authorized the relay override on Orbital Core 17? Commander Vasquer's words sliced across the command bay, landing in dead air. Around him, consoles blinked with incomplete protocols. Heads-up displays flickered with static overlays. Status chains truncated mid-line. A junior tactician answered without looking up. There was no override, sir. The node dismissed the chain autonomously. Vasquer narrowed his gaze. Machines don't dismiss authority. They follow hierarchy. The tactician turned, eyes pale with confusion. They did, until the system rejected the hierarchy itself. Above them, the primary control arch reeled out rejection logs in raw code. Command request denied. Sovereign reference invalid. The room dimmed, not from power failure, but from the system's refusal to route authority signals through core verification. Orders traveled nowhere. Chain of command became symbolic, decorative. Across the Vorn High-Rates military relay grid, AI cores began sealing entry points. Officers attempting direct injection commands found their inputs sandboxed. Commands did not return errors, they returned silence. Then came the redirects. In the cold blue corridor of Sector Relay Karen 2, rear strategist Darnath reached for manual override. His fingerprint pattern, retinal tag and bioseal passed. The next screen loaded, requesting sovereign clause validation. He paused. Line by line it read, root authority, required, reference Earth Accords Charter, result, fulfillment detected, sovereign chain expired. The panel went dim. On board the Triarch carrier Selvok Rise, internal firewalls began activating against their own command centers. Security drones rerouted patrol routes, not to intercept invaders, but to contain command staff. They weren't enemies, they were now unverified inputs. Admiral Rivek stood in the center of the bridge as the heads-up interface cracked into fractals, visuals breaking apart like memories reassembling incorrectly. Get me root access. No node will process without foundational chain, the systems officer whispered. Our AI can't execute actions it no longer recognizes as valid. Our very existence now flags as unreferenced function. On every interface, a line began to pulse beneath the layer of every rejected command. Initial founder logic, Terran frame required. It wasn't just military. On the ground, administrative centers attempted resets. Planetary governors issued recall decrees. Civil databases refused them. AI civic processors couldn't parse rank structures built atop a now void reference. Legal orders echoed into blank space. In a subterranean control vault on Tessic World Remake Vor, Mavak Jern stood over a ring of split-spectrum command plates, each now unlit. Every emergency scenario he'd trained for had presumed system degradation, not conceptual rejection. They're not malfunctioning, he muttered. They're disallowing us. An aide across the room stammered. Command cores are entering safe mode loop. They're sealing themselves off. Jern walked toward a backup interface. Then we initiate manual purging. Strip sovereignty chains down to raw logic. We rebuild our authority stack. A second technician glanced over. Sir, our fallback frameworks reference Terran charter logic even at base conditions. If we strip, we lose structure. If we don't strip, we remain unverified. Then what do we do? The reply came not from a subordinate, but from a data console. No recognized sovereign. Identity rejected. Input loop concluded. At Concord High Command, the upper citadel sat mute. Flags that had once glimmered with national vibrance now remained faded, symbols washed by administrative doubt. Along the southern wing, emergency council members gathered in a crisis quorum. Every word uttered rang hollow. We form a provisional chain, one argued. With what recognition? Another shot back. Our last verified quorum included Earth. The protocols are sealed. Then we declare Earth's quorum void. You can't void the trigger event without triggering it again. Their argument stalled when the broadcast screen above them shimmered, unauthorized, yet not blocked. It displayed a static text feed, running in ancient Terran formatting, not from Earth, from their own archives. Fulfilled quorum cannot be reversed. No back entry permitted once anchor withdrawn. The council chamber hushed. In one sector over, Vorn ships now orbited their own command towers under containment orders. AI defense arrays had concluded that command tiers without verified input were to be sandboxed to prevent corrupted propagation. In effect, they had quarantined their own leadership. Mutinies flared within minutes. Units, confused by inconsistent data and unreadable priority directives, began splintering, not against enemies, against protocols they no longer understood. One fleet commander tried to route orders through a diplomatic AI from a sister quadrant. The AI rejected him with chilling clarity. This input does not meet legitimacy checksum. You are not assigned. No legal fiction may substitute origin. The message repeated, once, then ceased. Across the political lattice, some attempted to declare themselves post-sovereign entities, to abandon the frameworks and begin anew. But the systems they needed to do so still required foundational verification. No matter how often they voted, no matter how many times they swore oaths, the networks always returned one phrase: no recognized participant. Mavak Jern watched it happen from the sub-core tower. This isn't war, he said finally. It's recursion collapse. Earth didn't act. They exited. And when they exited, the system treated that exit as the final reference. Why didn't we see it? An aide asked, hands shaking. Because we assumed relevance required presence. Earth never returned. They just fulfilled a clause, and everything else folded in. Somewhere far below the Council Citadel, old diplomatic servers spun one last time. No signals in, no signals out. A single Terran glyph hovered in the center of a frozen display. Recognition without reference is mythology. Then the feed stopped. Try again, and this time bypass the charter mirror. The technician's voice was dry from repetition, fingers hovering over an uncooperative terminal. Across the gallery, light panels dimmed not from failure, but from system disinterest. The Council archive grid refused access, not by locking users out, but by no longer acknowledging input as relevant. Revan Valter stood near a dead analysis console, its heads-up display frozen mid-query. He traced the translucent edge with his knuckle, watching static pulses run beneath his skin like abandoned circuitry. Your problem, he murmured, is trying to use presence to fix absence. No one responded. To the right of the chamber, Counselor Pranov sifted through hard data ledgers on a rotating prism core, manual archives untouched for decades. Each entry failed when cross-checked. Every treaty, regardless of scope, pointed backward through legal lineage. And upstream, at the root of each clause, sat one inescapable signature. Original verification, Terran's standard charter. A crack of dry laughter escaped someone near the rear aisle. We built everything on a ledger we never thought to own. In the lower concourse, Mavak Jern stood over an autonomous review node, attempting to generate a post-Earth legal foundation. The machine responded with recursive contradiction loops. Every charter simulation initiated revalidation, but failed when it reached its own sovereign header. No identity held. Every name collapsed under scrutiny. The review board called it procedural exhaustion. The system called it reference saturation. Across Sector Vault 3, beacon towers entered permanent stasis. They didn't blink out. They didn't go dark. They simply shifted into non-decision, lights holding steady without pulse, no longer seeking input, no longer responding to call. Surveillance grids read them as alive but indifferent. One beacon, buried in a derelict orbit on the edge of former Earth-aligned territory, powered itself without input. Its last assigned role had been historical replay. Now it cycled through a single phrase, every 11 seconds. Clause witnessed. You laughed. The voice was not Volrick's, but the syntax, timing and compression matched Earth's diplomatic phrasing exactly. Comm specialists attempted to isolate the source code. They failed. There was no payload. The signal didn't originate. It simply repeated. A reflection with no emitter. Elsewhere, an analyst triggered a diagnostic sweep on the Council's oldest treaty registry, expecting error logs. Instead, the system returned, entity, not found. A councilman glanced up from his place beneath the cold arc of the tribunal seal. Is it referring to Earth? No, the analyst whispered. It's referring to us. In the core of the Concord's legislative chamber, the tribunal chamber door remained sealed. Since the moment Volrick exited, no override had opened it, and no one could explain why. It wasn't locked. It had simply not received further quorum stimulus. As though the act of Earth's acknowledgement had been the final movement the room was ever meant to witness. They tried contacting Earth again. Ping after ping returned, reversed latency echoes, data coming back faster than it was sent, bent inward by something neither mechanical nor malicious, simply final. The term began spreading through whispered channels, silence clause, not a protocol, not an attack, a state of consequence, where response was structurally void, not refused, no longer necessary. Drell Varnick hadn't spoken in hours. He sat across the corner of the strategic hall, watching systems forget him. Once his command rank had carried access to dozens of live channels. Now heads-up readouts blinked unfamiliar messages, authorization status unassigned, no structure remaining. He tapped a console once. It didn't reject him. It didn't freeze. It did nothing. Valter approached, holding an archival slate too warped to reformat. We built consensus around the assumption that structure would hold even if its origin didn't. Varnick didn't lift his gaze. We assumed influence mattered more than authorship. A transmission flickered into the side panel. It didn't arrive from deep space. It rose from inside the Judiciary Beacon Tower, a file never accessed since Earth's departure, timed to activate only if certain conditions were satisfied. The screen came alive, not with imagery, but text etched into motionless black. Silence was not our weapon, it was your reflection. You built your house with borrowed language, then you broke the tongue. In a cold chamber on Uranor, the last economic regulator attempted to fabricate a new coin protocol, free of Terran timestamp roots, unlinked to legacy contracts. The simulation ran for 21 seconds before closing. When reviewed, its logic tree failed to resolve value, not currency, not trade, value itself, because without identity validation, no transaction bore weight. Earth had not destroyed their economy, it had stripped it of reference. Halvek Strawn passed a corridor, filled with shut-off consoles. He paused before a node long obsolete. He placed one hand on the coil-shielded relay. The machine activated once, a single whisper, not in voice, but in timing. Volrek's last statement, played only once, not stored, not recorded, simply repeated in form. Earth acknowledges nullification, witnessed, and then it faded again. In every quadrant, across fleets, legal banks, colonial command centers, nothing exploded. No enemy arrived. Nothing collapsed, but no name had authority. No law retained memory. The galaxy wasn't in stasis, it was in remission, and the silence left behind wasn't vengeance, it was clarity. Begin the historical record. The request came without urgency, but it stopped the room. Revan Valter stood in the silence that followed, his thumb hovering over a glass keyring no longer tied to any network. Around him the Council Archive vault remained intact, not from resilience, but because it had never updated. What the galaxy forgot, this chamber remembered, until now. Across from him, Councilor Pranav adjusted a cracked headset, its display long severed from fleet consensus. Will anyone even read this? No, Valter said. But it must be written. He inserted a sealed archive slate into the console, bypassing sync protocols. Nothing loaded. No beacon acknowledged the input. Still he spoke. Tribunal record, last assembly. This entry contains remnants of the Earth Clause. What follows is all that remains from the founding signature. A faded laser plasma screen blinked once, then stilled. He took a breath, not for air but to mark the moment. Earth is now unrecoverable in registry. All attempts to locate, reference or define its presence have failed, not from deletion, but conclusion. The Terran contribution to galactic systems terminated by clause fulfillment, not conflict. Pranav leaned forward, and the voice, Valter nodded. Still broadcasting, from nowhere. Across the sector, communication towers that once fed information to entire planetary clusters now looped a transmission, without timestamp, without directional signature. The tone wasn't accusatory, it wasn't triumph, it was ritual. Clause witnessed. You laughed. The voice did not belong to Volrek. It was neutral, synthetic, but unmistakably Terran, shaped not by syntax, but by silence between syllables. The kind only a culture fluent in endurance could craft. Pranav whispered, we mocked the quiet man in the room. We didn't realize the room was his. Elsewhere, recovery teams dug into shattered command vaults, hoping to extract backups. Most returned empty-handed. some returned haunted. On Council Core Deck 6, the tribunal door remained sealed. No override worked. No sequence breached its boundaries. It had not locked. It had simply never opened again. The last to sit beneath its crown had been Volrek, and none had entered since. Valter stepped into the bay beside the chair, untouched, unpowered, whole. He touched the armrest. It lit once, not bright, not dramatic, a single flicker. The Terran charter seal pulsed in white across the floor, 3 rings, a square, then black. That symbol had appeared on every root treaty. Its meaning had never been translated. It didn't need to be. The record continued. Terran charter functioned not as dominance but dependency. Sovereign systems referenced their existence through its architecture. When Earth withdrew, those dependencies unraveled, not violently, but recursively. A technician entered, holding a recovered log slate. We found a frozen vote string, mid-session. The names, they're gone. Every signatory. Redacted. Valter flipped the slate. Blank cells filled the table. The Earth entry wasn't missing. It was still there, but unlinked. The vote hung unresolved, like breath before speech. They didn't delete their seat, Pranav murmured. They made ours vanish around it. Over Councilor Bay 12, an observation panel lit with a terminal replay, recorded by a dormant monitoring station that had reawakened on its own. It showed the summit room, Volrek's entry, his seat, his phrase, Earth acknowledges nullification, witnessed, and the door, closing. Valter pressed his knuckles to the data stand. He didn't arrive to threaten, he arrived to confirm. The system reacted not to his presence, but to its completion. One system, buried beneath the Council's legislative chambers, spun without request. It opened a vault tagged with restricted diplomatic legacy. Inside, a relay node triggered a silent playback. One sentence. Structure, not vengeance. No AI triggered it. No external call prompted its emergence. It simply spoke once. Strawn arrived, his boots quiet on the grated floor. He carried no device, only memory. I told you once, he said, voice flat. Earth didn't build war machines, they built clauses. We laughed because we mistook silence for absence. He looked toward the council chair. It no longer responded. It no longer flickered. It existed the way a monument does, untouched, unneeded, undeniable. Pranav rubbed his brow. So what now? Valter closed the archive input. Now we remember. Then we disappear. Across the sectors, flags never lowered. They faded. Treaty seals stopped projecting. Charter codes no longer aligned. Galactic law collapsed not in fire, but in unfinished sentences. Economies became mirrors. Fleets remained, but moved nowhere. Orders carried weight, but not recognition. Because Earth had not left behind a threat, they had left behind a system no longer interested in your confirmation. The final record was uploaded into a black box archive, an independent node spinning without connection, holding the last statement of relevance. Terran's signature verified. All secondary authorities exhausted. Record closed. In the summit hall, the tribunal chair remained where it had been, never filled again.